about to the Tunxis community about daily journalism and online publication. And I begin introductions at the end there with Jennifer Frank. Ms. Frank is the editor of the Connecticut Mirror, a nonprofit online news site which publishes at the web address www.ctmirror.org. She was born in New York. She grew up in Stanford, graduated from Trinity College. She's been a Connecticut journalist for more than 2 decades, first at the Day of New London, then at the Hartford Courant, where she was at one time or another news editor, politics editor, and editor of Northeast, the Courant's Sunday news magazine. I should mention too, while at the Courant, she co-authored with her colleagues Ann Farrow and Joel Lang a book, Complicity, How the North Promoted, Prolonged, and Profited from Slavery, which began actually as an advertisement-free special section in the Courant. Made into a book. I should also add, the students in my African American history class, I think some of you are probably here today, you should be quite familiar with the special section because I showed it to you at the start of the semester. And in fact, it provided a sort of foundation for the first couple of weeks of the course. When I asked Ms. Frank to appear at the forum and told her what we were talking about, she pointed out that she had been on the job at the Connecticut Mirror for all of 12 weeks, which she said probably hardly qualified her as an online expert. Since then, she's been on the job for 8 more weeks. And in the world of journalism, 20 weeks makes you a veteran. It really does. So, thank you. This end, Doug Hardy. Doug is business manager of the website Connecticut News Junkie, and you can find that one at www.ctnewsjunkie.com. He's showing this later to you. Where his wife, the journalist Christine Stewart, is the editor. In Doug's own words, I was trying to think last evening about how many awards for reporting they have won. They had won during my time in the press with them, and I stopped counting when I got to 25. So, during their time with the press, Jackie and Steve assumed responsibility for our efforts to cultivate young journalists in our communities. They agreed to take on oversight and mentoring of the high school writers who produced a publication that ran periodically in the press called The Tattoo. Under Jackie and Steve, The Tattoo grew from its roots in the Bristol area to a global online publication with young writers who filed news reports from areas as diverse as El Salvador and Egypt and Indian reservations in Nebraska. A series of articles that appeared in The Tattoo by a young journalist named Samantha Perez from Louisiana reporting on her life in the wake of Hurricane Katrina won widespread national attention and acclaim. Most recently, to support their efforts, Jackie and Steve created the nonprofit organization Youth Journalism International, which advances the work they began with The Tattoo. If you're interested, you can see the outstanding work of their young journalists at www.youthjournalism.com. Org. I'm sorry, yes, nonprofit. Youth Journalism International advertises itself as the finest high school journalism in the world. It's a big claim, but if you take the time to read it, you'll see it's not exaggerated. Really do an extraordinary job. The panelists each approach online publishing from a different perspective. Collectively, though, I think we can say that they have as much insight as any other 4 journalists working in Connecticut on what is still something of a fairly new and brave and uncertain journey. We welcome them here today and thank them for attending. Before we start, I'd like to show you, some of my students of the last 2 or 3 years have probably seen this, what I'm going to show you, but I think it sort of sets the framework for what we're going to be talking about. It's about an 8-minute video, it's a YouTube video, and it's called Epic 2014. And Epic 2014 is a mock documentary done by a couple of videographers that purports to look at the evolution of journalism from the 1980s up until the future, 2014, 2015. They're sort of trying to predict, shape, frame what's going to happen next. And I think that they offer some really interesting insights. So I'll play this for you, and we'll get underway. Somebody hit the lights. Oh, that's okay. Stop doing that.
It is the best of times. It is the worst of times. In the year 2015, people have access to a breadth and depth of information unimaginable in an earlier age. Everyone contributes in some way, participating to create a living, breathing mediascape. However, the press as you know it has ceased to exist. The fourth estate's fortunes have waned. 20th century news organizations are an afterthought, a lonely remnant of a not too distant past. The road to 2015 began in the late 20th century. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee, a computer scientist at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory in Switzerland, invents the World Wide Web. Amazon.com is founded in 1994. Its young creator dreams of a store that sells everything. Amazon's model, which will come to set the standard for internet sales, is built on automated, personalized recommendations, a store that can make suggestions. In 1998, two Stanford programmers unleash Google. Their algorithm echoes the logic of Amazon. It treats links as recommendations, and from that foundation, powers the world's fastest and most effective search engine. In 1999, a dot-com startup named Pyro Labs unveils Blogger, a personal publishing tool. Friendster arrives on the scene in 2002, and hundreds of thousands of young people rush to populate it with an incredibly detailed catalog of their lives, their interests, and their social networks. Also in 2002, Google launches Google News, a portal featuring headlines and links to the stories of the minute. Journalism organizations cry foul. Google News is edited entirely by computers. In 2003, Google buys Blogger. 2004 will be remembered as the year that everything began. Reason magazine sends subscribers an issue with a satellite photo of their houses on the cover and information custom tailored to each subscriber inside. Google unveils Gmail with a gigabyte of free space for every user. Microsoft launches NewsBot, a social news filter. Google buys Picasa, a tool for organizing images. Amazon releases A9, a search engine built on Google's technology that also incorporates Amazon's trademark recommendations. And then, in August, Google goes public. Awash in new capital, it acquires Keyhole, a company that maps the world and puts it online. Google also begins digitizing and indexing the world's libraries. Apple's iPod inspires podcasting, and the age of personal radio begins. We can all broadcast our own thoughts, our own music, directly to each other's music players. 2005. In response to Google's recent moves, Microsoft buys Friendster. Apple releases the Wi-Fi Pod, a portable media player with integrated camera that can send and receive podcasts and images on the go. 2006. Google combines all of its services into the Google Grid, a universal platform that provides a functionally limitless amount of disk space and bandwidth to store and share media of all kinds. Each user selects her own level of privacy. She can store her content securely on the Google Grid, or publish it for all to see. It has never been easier for people to make their lives part of the media landscape. 2007. Microsoft responds to Google's mounting challenge with NewsBotster, a social news network and participatory journalism platform. NewsBotster ranks and sorts news based on what each user's friends and colleagues are reading and viewing, and it allows everyone to comment on what they see. 2008 sees the alliance that will challenge Microsoft's ambitions. Google and Amazon join forces, forming Googlezon. Google supplies the Google Grid, an unparalleled search technology. Amazon supplies a social recommendation engine and its huge commercial infrastructure. Together, they use their detailed knowledge of every user's social network, demographics, buying habits, and reading interests to provide total customization of content and advertising. This year, the New York Times switches to a paid subscription model online. However, its content stream remains open to Google's indexing computers. The news wars of 2010 are notable for the fact that no actual news organizations take part. Google's and Microsoft face off, enhancing their services week by week. Google's finally checkmates Microsoft with a feature the software giant cannot match. Using new algorithms, Google's computers screen stories for names, places, images, and other contextual cues, isolating facts from quotes and turning statistics into flexible equations. Then, Google's resorts, recalculates, and recombines these scraps with our information. Our blog entries, our photos, our purchases, our lives. Suddenly, news is more relevant than ever before. In 2011, the slumbering Fourth Estate awakes to make its first and final stand. The New York Times company sues Google's claiming that the company's fact-stripping robots are a violation of copyright law. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, which, on August 4, 2011, decides in favor of Google's. On Sunday, March 9, 2014, Google's unleashes Epic. The evolving, personalized information construct is the system by which our sprawling, chaotic mediascape is filtered, ordered, and delivered. Everyone contributes, and many people get paid. A tiny cut of Google's immense advertising revenue, proportional to the popularity of their contributions. Epic produces a custom content package for each user, using his choices, his consumption habits, his interests, his demographic, his social network to shape the product. At its best, tailored to its savviest readers, Epic is a summary of the world, deeper, broader, and more nuanced than anything ever available before. But at its worst, and for too many, Epic is merely a collection of trivia, much of it untrue, all of it narrow, shallow, and sensational. In 2014, the New York Times goes offline. In feeble protest to Google's hegemony, the Times becomes a print-only newsletter for the elite and the elderly. 2015. Pinky Nankani, a refugee from the defunct New York Times digital edition, finds a new journalistic calling. She begins to collect and filter GPS-tagged neighborhood broadcasts. Soon, Pinky's feed is a local lodestone, and more of her neighbors tag their broadcasts with GPS data as they realize they too could be a part of it.
Hey, it's me. If you're listening, I think a bunch of us are going to go meet up at Progress Park. We're thinking about doing like a little barbecue. I was thinking
Mayfield Park, down bottom of 9th Street. There's this big accident at Garfield, and it's all backed up. It's totally a mess. So,
Are you guys going out today? If you haven't gone out today, please go out today. It's an incredible day. Take a look at this.
I'm curious, have any of you seen this before? Yeah. I think one of the things that strikes me, and one of the reasons that I think it's, I thought I would begin with this, is how very imaginative presentation, but also in many ways wrong. Just absolutely. It turns out that journalism is incredibly adaptive, and people here today are illustrations of that. I asked each of them to give a brief overview of their publication, ideally no more than 3 or 4 minutes. I'll flash them up on the screen. And then we can get down to questions and answers. First, Jennifer Frank, could you talk about CT Mirror? Sure.
Testing. CT Mirror started 3 years ago. It was started by a small group of people in the New Haven area who were worried by what they perceived as a drop in the quality and quantity of real news. There had been massive cutbacks at the Hartford Courant, the statewide newspaper, and at many, many other newspapers, if not every paper in the state. And they got together and said that we need a quality publication online that reports on Connecticut's policy, on its news, on its newsmakers, because this is required by a democracy, by a strong and healthy democracy. The staff now, I came 20 weeks, Bob's keeping track of this. My background is I had worked at the Hartford Courant for many years, and things were changing fast enough. I had been editor of the Sunday magazine until they closed it, and then I'd gone out into the newsroom, and I had been unhappy with some personnel changes and decided to go to the New London Day. I worked at the Day, a small paper covering southeastern Connecticut. It started having a dramatic decline in staff. There were a lot of layoffs. Advertising got cut way back because of the economy as well as other things. And when I was called and asked if I would take over the editorship of the Mirror, I didn't hesitate and said yes immediately. We have a staff of about 8. About half of us are former Hartford Courant people. We've got several young fellows. We have someone from the Journal-Inquirer who covers the state budget and knows more than anybody on the planet about it. We're doing the best we can in giving readers depth as well as breadth, but the emphasis is definitely on depth, because many of the papers, because of their staffing, because of their the requirements they have, can no longer do analyses. They can't. It's hard for them because of personnel cutbacks to connect things, and that's what the Mirror at this point thinks that it does just about as well as anybody in the state, if not, may I say, a little better. ctmirror.org, check it out.
And there it is, right there. Okay. Doug Hardy, yours up there to take a couple minutes.
How's it going? So in 2005, a friend of mine named Dan Levine started CT News Junkie. And about 9 months later, he got a great job offer in California. And so he had worked with my wife, Christine, and basically kind of handed off the site to her. He didn't want the site to go under, but he wanted this job in California. So my wife, having worked with Dan at the Hartford Advocate, said, well, why not? You know, she was at the Journal-Inquirer. She was bumping up against the ceiling in terms of advancement. And, you know, it was, even in 2005, it was pretty obvious that a lot of print publications weren't forward-thinking. They weren't thinking about the future at all in terms of, you know, where they're going to be digitally and stuff like that. So we weren't even married at the time, but, you know, she bought the site, got started, spent 2 years going to the Capitol every day and working at it and grinding away. And that's the reality of online news, is that to get yourself an audience, you have to really work at it, a labor of love, for no money, for a few years. I think it's faster now. The growth curve is a lot faster because in 05, 06, nobody ever really heard of Facebook. There weren't even really email blasts being used, you know, as a business tool. But around 08, well, we got married in 07. We thought about starting a nonprofit. We thought about launching a Hartford site. We didn't get any funding, and that was when we had a conversation about, you know, what else I could do to help News Junkie. And she was basically running the whole thing on her own. But we didn't have much of an audience, no revenue. People were donating occasionally, but for the most part, it was zero revenue. We had $300 our first year that we were selling advertising. It was a banner year. Wasn't even enough to buy a new camera, you know. So, but we started growing. We started an email blast. In 10 weeks, we quintupled our traffic to the site by putting links to the site in the email blast. Now, this may sound kind of ridiculous and obvious, but at the time, nobody was really doing this. So we signed up for Constant Contact, got the email blast going once a week. We harvested all the public email addresses at the Capitol that we could find, the legislators and the constitutional officers, and we started growing, and advertisers started calling. I think we peaked at about 11,000 page views for a month that year, and then we jumped to 30,000 the following year, and then we hit 100,000. And last year, we averaged 200,000 page views. And most of that, believe it or not, are people visiting just from the Capitol building and the Legislative Office building. We haven't even really tapped into local audiences. But it's a specialized publication. It's all politics. And I decided to leave the Journal-Inquirer a year ago this month for a variety of reasons, but we were generating enough advertising revenue that I could start taking commission, and you know, my wife and I both have side gigs. I work for Westlaw, it's a court search engine. I schlep cases for them. My wife actually works for Courthouse News Service, which is a similar service, but it requires a little bit of different work on her part. She spends a couple hours a day. So between those two gigs, advertising and donations, and we just recently signed a deal with the Journal-Register company that will bring in a little bit more revenue in exchange for them using our news in print and online. The deal is that they have to link back to our site. So we're going to benefit from the millions of page views a month that the Journal-Register newspapers get around Connecticut, and hopefully see our traffic outside of Hartford grow. So, I mean, it's a complicated thing. I think I've spent the last 5 years just thinking about the internet business model for news. The video is kind of interesting. I think it started to deviate probably before the Google's on thing, but I'm pretty sure Google has not bought Amazon. No, not yet.
They do buy YouTube.
They bought YouTube, but they didn't buy Amazon. But that was when I think it started to get more fictional. But you know, where news fits in has really puzzled me. And it's been, you know, having worked at the Journal-Inquirer and kind of watching them collapse, they're still there, but we attacked the digital market and ramped up to 1 million page views a month for the first time. And over that 4 or 5 month period, the paper's paid circulation dropped catastrophically. So that was their first indication that the two don't go together, you know, and maybe some other newspapers learned that on their own, but you know, basically, if you're going to have people pay for something in print, you can't give it away for free somewhere else and expect to survive. And I think print has priced itself out of the marketplace because of the cost of delivery. And the economic reality for print is the internet has eliminated the delivery cost. So they can pretend, but it's not going to help to keep giving away their material for free. So that was part of the reason, you know, dove right into the news junkie with my wife, and things have been going pretty well.
Thanks, Doug. Jackie and Steve, Jackie and Steve Collins, the co-founders of New Journalism International. And before they talk about what they're doing, there's a bunch of literature next to the food back there that you can pick up that deals with New Journalism International. I encourage you to do that before you leave. So I don't know who's going to speak, but I assume one of you will.
We're just going to play off each other. I'm Jackie, and I just want to, first of all, thank Bob Brown, my friend, former boss, and journalism colleague, and Tunxis for providing this wonderful opportunity to all of us to share our stories with all of you. That's pretty cool that Tunxis is doing this. So I want to thank that. I want to thank Dr. Addy too. I saw her walk in. I appreciate her being here and her support of this program. it's nice for us to be up here with Doug Hardy and Jennifer Frank. Their sites are important, especially in Connecticut, and I certainly am a consumer of their work. You go next.
Well, let me give you a quick overview of Youth Journalism International. So the picture of what it is today is we have students in at least 40 countries on 6 continents. They write news stories, they take pictures, they write commentary, they write reviews, they do all sorts of wonderful work. We publish it at our website, youthjournalism.org, and also on a daily blog, yjiblog.org. They've won tons of awards over the years. Their work has appeared in many other places as well, PBS NewsHour, National Public Radio, National Geographic Textbook. They've interviewed all kinds of luminaries around the world, from the Dalai Lama to Derek Jeter. I mean, there's all kinds of great opportunities that they've had, and we are very lucky to be able to share a lot of them with them.
But we didn't start out being a worldwide, amazing organization like we have now with kids all over the world. Really, the way this started, our little adventure began in 1994. It was the brainchild of a old-fashioned news editor at an old-fashioned newspaper that lands on your doorstep around dinner time every day. That old, crusty old editor, who's a dear friend of ours, really had a very forward way of thinking, and he believed that it was really important that young people have a voice in their community newspaper for several reasons. One, he thought what they had to say was important. Two, he thought that whatever they had to say would bring in younger readers, which every newspaper needs. And three, he really wanted to start growing a new crop of reporters. So he wanted to train young journalists. And this was a great idea, and everything was perfect about his idea except for one thing, and that was that he really couldn't stand kids. So, really, and so he turned to me and said, "Well, would you like to, work with some teenagers?" And Bob can attest to the veracity of this. And I said, "Oh, I really would. I would love to do that." So we started this little organization, and it started on a very small local scale, and he pretty much was hands off because, like I said, he didn't really like these kids, but he liked what they did, and he remains a cheerleader for us today. But when we got started, one of the things we were determined to do, and Steve was with us right from the start too, one of the things we were determined to do was to do serious journalism and not just the typical schlock that appears in publications aimed at young people, because we knew that they were more serious and there was more depth to young people than just the latest craze. And although we do provide things like stories about prom or senior rings or movie reviews or the latest craze sometimes, we also tackle some really serious subjects. And it started out with projects on teen pregnancy and coverage of the presidential debate that was held in Hartford in 1994 and 96, sorry. And we didn't think that there was any subject that was off limits to us, any subject that wasn't of interest, anything that was interesting to the kids and to the people who cared about them. And those were the people that we thought were our audience, was important enough for us to tackle. So we decided to do a big project on teen suicide. We had about a dozen kids looking through public records and investigating the ways that kids had died over the past 15 years in this area, had them interview the parents of the dead kids, and that's some pretty heavy work for 15, 16-year-old kids. And they did an amazing job. Produced a terrific package of stories that won a lot of awards, and that prompted Steve to do something really bold.
So this is back in 1996 when the internet was still something that people had either never heard of or were only dimly aware of. But we decided that those stories about teen suicide had to go up on the internet somehow. So I had to figure out how to make a website and get us up there. Mostly because we wanted to make sure that the stories would stick around, that people would still be able to read them a year from now, or 2 years, or 10 years. Or it's one of the funny things about newspapers that, you know, however great the story is, tomorrow it's just garbage. It's gone. and we wanted the stories to be available. So I made a very primitive website, and from then on, everything our kids did, we put it up online, and gradually we started hearing from other teenagers around the country wondering if they could participate, and then we started hearing from kids around the world, and they'd usually write a story or two for us and then sort of vanish, and then after, you know, it was probably about 10 or 12 years ago, right? We got a writer in Singapore named Kaisha Lee who started writing for us and just kept writing, and we kept talking to her on IM and emailing and talking on the telephone, and pretty soon she was as much a part of this group as anyone in Bristol or Plymouth or Farmington, because she was just totally involved. And in fact, it wasn't very long after that she managed to get a scholarship to come to Wesleyan, so she was actually right here in Connecticut. So it was kind of cool. And it's just grown since then. I mean, when she started publishing, I think kids around the world realized that we were interested in having their stuff, and so we started having all kinds of people from India and Iran and Europe and everywhere, and so it's just kept snowballing ever since, and we've been the lucky recipients of that.
Thank you all. One function of today's event is, with the background, I think most of you are aware of what we do at Tunxis, but we have identified as part of our curriculum, the heart of our curriculum, 10 basic, what we call general education ability clusters, one of which is citizenship, values, and ethics. And students, in order to succeed in meeting all the general education abilities, they have to work that deals with each one of them. Now, the issue with citizenship, values, and ethics is it's not an ability that necessarily lends itself to assessment in a classroom environment. It's something that is co-curricular. You can fulfill the requirements in any number of ways. And one reason why we're having this forum when we are is I want to pose what I think of as an interesting ethical issue in online publication to the panelists and get their response to it. And the issue is this. When I was in journalism, way back in the dark ages before the internet, we had a pretty simple policy regarding publishing content submitted by our readers. They would write letters to the editor, and we would print letters to the editor. And I do have to say that it was something that we at the press put great emphasis on, and then in a period of 5 years, we increased our letters to the editor by 500%, simply by promising we will run them. And people, it turns out, have a lot they want to say. We did have a certain set of requirements, however. And the essential requirement is you have to sign your name, and you have to allow your name to appear with your letter. Ownership of what you wrote. And I certainly never, when I was responsible for putting letters to the editor paper, I never questioned the need to demand identification. I do know that if you go online, any online publication, and you read an article, and at the end of the article you'll see places for comment. And people do comment on the articles, and I can remember a particular focus during the last spring, the great budget battle in which state employees were asked to make concessions, and then first they didn't, and then they did. And I can remember reading News Junkie and the Currents website and the Bristol Press and ztmirror.org, and seeing an endless line of comments after the articles, the overwhelming majority of which were signed anonymous. And I just wonder whether you think that there's a challenge to that. I know that there are issues with that. I know that last month, I think Paul Bass of New Haven Independent decided not to run comments because he said the volume had gotten so great that he couldn't keep track of the veracity of individual comments. Now, a week later, he backed off under pressure from his readers, who it turns out like to read their stuff. He said he's going to read them all. There's certain very rigorous criteria that have to be followed. I think that he's not going to demand that the person's name automatically, everybody has to know who it is. And I'm wondering if you think that the pattern in online responses to articles sort of encourages an irresponsibility on the part of the writer. And at first, and Steve, I know you did something last week on your blog. I'd like to get to that too. But I don't know, who wants to go first? Jennifer?
I'm going to be real profound here. I have no idea. I just don't know what the answer is here. I do know that when the state employees and the governor were at odds, that were at loggerheads, our site, the number of hits on our site quintupled, sextupled, you know, keep going. And most of them were anonymous. Our policy now is, it's a matter of, is there name calling? I mean, we try to have standards that make sense. I would say a half dozen comments a week, I kill. They're just not acceptable. I think that there is something to be said for Hello? Okay. I think there's something to be said for allowing anonymity. I don't love it. I think it's going to change eventually. But now I think the best that we can do, by the way, Bob, I think that Paul Bass at the New Haven Independent cut off comments because of the quantity, but also the quality. There were really some horrendous things being said. They were racist and sexist, etc. And nobody will tolerate that. But you are correct. This is really something that I've worked at 3 publications now, the Current, the Day, and now the Mirror. We all struggle with it, and I don't know what the answer is.
Just seeking insight. That's okay. That's fine. Okay, Doug. How does CT News Junkie go about dealing with?
Well, we moderate them all. We don't post anything until we've read them. And we do have a number of cranky old men who like to post. You should end every comment with, "And get off my lawn," you know. But, this is something we've been talking about as an industry for quite a while. And there are, aside from ethical issues, there are economic issues. I know, and I wasn't working at the Current at the time, but I've spoken to quite a few Current people about it. And when their website exploded with traffic, they ended up with 2 or 3 full-time jobs just trying to moderate the comments. So that's 2 or 3 people who aren't out gathering news anymore. They're reading cranky old men comments, you know? I mean, what a waste of resources. And so with Paul Bass in New Haven, something really hurtful had gotten through, and he just blew up the gasket and said, "That's it, I'm turning off the comments." And so he did it for a while, and he started the conversation, which it was kind of shocking, because in the big scheme of internet journalism, or even just journalism today, I mean, Paul Bass belongs up on the Mount Rushmore of journalism. His site is the first one that really took off on a community journalism basis. And I mean, he's probably getting 500,000 page views a month out of just the city of New Haven, you know, and the site plays a huge role in the public conversation. But if you read the comments, a lot of them were kind of nasty, and what I think happened for them is as their traffic volume got to the point, it just became unmanageable. The number of comments became unmanageable, and they just couldn't read them carefully and produce news. And you know, occasionally we'll post something on News Junkie that we regret. I'll look back and I'll say, "Oh, that shouldn't be up there," and we'll spike that too. I don't really communicate with the people very often.
it's a waste of time. And part of the problem
I liken anonymous commenting to driving. People think they're anonymous. You know, they think that they can do anything they want and say anything they want. There's this subconscious fail-safe that just gets thrown away, and people are showing the worst part of their personalities. I mean, I'm sure you've all gotten into an argument once or twice with somebody on Facebook. I mean, the beauty of Facebook is that it takes work to really fake an identity on Facebook. I mean, you've got to fill in a lot of information. So there's new tools. One of the solutions might be to just use Facebook comment. I mean, there's 750 million people on Facebook. Is there anybody in you who is not using Facebook? Can I get a show of hands? It's more than I thought. More than I thought. You know, and to be honest, I don't think I would have made it out of high school if Facebook was around. So I do not envy anybody, you know, to be a student in the day and age of Facebook. But there is a commenting tool, and we may install that on ours just to try and take the pressure off us and to create a little bit more identity.
I thought when you finished your presentation, your overview there, that I would maybe observe that you and Christine sound like the original mom and pop publication, but you're too young for that. But then I heard you say, and get off my lawn. And I think, okay, maybe, yeah. Sure, maybe that does apply. Steve, you did something with your blog, I think, in the spring. The Bristol Today blog, that's your press, you decided to censor or to edit as well.
Well, yeah, I have a blog for my job at the Bristol Press, and there's a lot of comments on there for quite a lot of years, and there was a lot of back and forth with readers, and you know, I tried to engage them there because that was sort of like one of the ideas and goals, and for a long time I sort of put up with that, but it got to be there were so many comments, and so much of it was so Looney Tune toxic is a good word for it, that I finally decided it wasn't worth my time anymore to even read the stuff, let alone respond to it and moderate it. So I just cut it off, and for a long time I didn't allow any comments at all, and then I started letting people back in with, as long as they registered and they had some sort of name, even if it wasn't the real name, at least they had to have a handle like that, you know, something that you could identify a given person, and it's been better. But I think part of the reason it's been better is I haven't paid as much attention to the blog lately, so they don't comment as much. But really the problem with it is that it takes a lot of time, and I think my time is much more valuable than to be reading rants from crazy people. So, and I think sure that's true of journalism as a whole. If we could automate it all by using, I think the same thing with Facebook comments are the way to go, because then you've got somebody's real name, their real face. You know, most people aren't going to say really outrageous, crazy things if you know if they have to have their name attached to it. So hopefully that'll be the future.
I have to share one story from the days of print, just to check it out then too. Then I'm going to use a vulgarity here in just a second, so cover your ears if you're sensitive. But I remember getting a letter to the editor once from a former mayor of Bristol, a crank. He'd always run against everybody, and he'd won actually 2 terms as mayor, a man named Frank Longo. And Frank had a tendency to write really sort of prolix, long letters to the editor explaining how he tried to do things when he was mayor and nobody's been as good as him since then. And he wrote a letter about downtown redevelopment in Bristol. And if you've been through Bristol, you know it has not downtown. Though they're working on that. And in the middle of his letter, I think he put it in the middle because he thought I wouldn't read that far. He said, I almost had everything fixed up, but then along came Harry Norman the shit ass and ruined everything. And I called him and I said, Frank, you can't say shit ass in the Bristol Press. And he said, why not? I have freedom of the press. And I said, no, we have freedom of the press. You have freedom of speech. You can stand on the street corner and say anything you want to. But we decide what goes in our publication, and we're not going to use that word. So he changed it. But yeah, sort of, there's a universal condition there. Sort of more journalistic immediacy, perhaps. Do you guys feel pressed, Doug and Jennifer in particular, to update several times a day? Or do you do basically a daily publication? Yeah, how does that work? It seems to me like you go crazy.
Do you sleep?
Yeah, I know.
I
That's what I think.
Well, Christine Stewart has a reputation of several years ago she figured out how to clone herself, and she is everywhere. She is, I've never seen anything like it. At the Mirror, we update constantly. You have to, and it's exhausting. But it's important. And I think all you guys, I mean, if you look at a site and it says the same thing time after time, you're not going to bother. So we know that it's important, and you have no choice. It's a different animal. It's even different from, I never worked for AP or any of the wire services, but it's different. You constantly have to be on top of things. And that's just the way it is. Doug, I don't know. If you have any tricks, let me know.
No, it's not me. It's not me. I was lucky. You know, I married a hardworking partner. You know, we're business partners. We're not just married. And so it's crazy. And unfortunately, I guess let me step back. So let's say I'm a full-time reporter at a newspaper, and all I'm required to do is make sure my byline appears in the paper once a day. And if you haven't had a cost of living raise for 6 or 7 years, they don't even review your performance anymore. And this is where newspapers are, because they're practically going under. They can't give cost of living raises, so the production, level of productivity goes down. Now, with CT News Junkie, we're an internet product, and we monetize our traffic, meaning we charge a rate, a CPM, cost per thousand. I don't know why they use M as a Roman numeral in that, but CPM, cost per thousand. You know, if it's $10, 1,000 impressions on that banner, we earn $10. Okay, so there's definitely a monetary pressure to keep your traffic growing and keep it steady. So if I've got 100 readers and I put one story up each day, that's 100 page views. And see where I'm going with this? If you put up 5 stories a day, that's 500 page views. They haven't figured out how to really monitor unique visitors yet. This is what the value of newspaper advertising is. It's their circulation based. They charge a rate of advertising based on the number of people who subscribe, the number of copies that go out. So it's kind of similar, but with the internet, a unique visitor is not a unique subscriber. I mean, there are subscription models on the internet that can monetize that way, but advertisers are willing to pay for multiple visits from the same person. Anyway, I'm getting a little detailed here, but you have to post as much as you can, and it's a business hours thing. You post 3 or 4 times a day during business hours, and you will grow.
The model for the Associated Press, the worldwide news organization, and the title of the official history of the Associated Press that was printed back, I think, in the late 1970s was called A Deadline Every Minute. And basically, you guys have a deadline every instant. If it needs to be updated, it gets updated right now.
How many laws are being discussed on a daily basis at the Capitol? It's a target-rich environment. You need to post a lot, otherwise people will figure out that there's not that much of interest on your site.
I'm not looking to ask Steve and Jackie to tell stories out of school, but the Bristol Press is a print publication that has a website that I don't think gets updated multiple times a day. Did you feel any pressure to file multiples?
Well, yes, I mean, we do, it does get updated more than it used to. I mean, it's part of the reason I had a blog is because I couldn't stand waiting until tomorrow morning for things to get up, and the news is out there. I wanted it to be out there. But every newspaper feels the pressure to get stuff up regularly, and the press can do better than it does, but it has the same pressure. And in fact, we do too. I mean, we have to change things for our YJI stuff, just because you don't want people to look at the sites and have everything just be the same day after day. Like you said, nobody's going to come back if it's always the same.
And newspapers used to do multiple editions, right? Yeah. I mean, that was the other thing. The newspapers used to update their website by producing, they would update, replate, print out 10,000 copies, find an update, get another 10,000 with the new information in it. The Providence Journal does it all day, still. But they're a healthy organization. They're printing the New London Day now. So their printing press is running Oh, they stopped. Where's the new one they're printing? Oh, wow.
Current's figured out a way
I'm
to
way
supplement
behind.
revenue, yeah. Yeah.
But you know, if your presses are running 24/7, you are making money. But if your press is only run for one publication, this is what newspapers are facing. You know, they can't afford to print updated editions. The Current used to have like 8 different editions.
Yeah, when I was there, I did, I worked on the editorial page, and we would frequently replay the opinion page next to it. State of the Union, the president starts delivering it at 6:30, you get the advance copy at say 4, and your first edition rolls at 5:15, 5:30. And then through the evening, he actually is delivering it, and he does make some changes, and so I did replay 5 or 6 times in the evening, just to get the final version of the op-ed. A question, is print dead?
You don't want to hear my answer.
I do want to hear your answer.
You can go first.
Okay, that's our website. It's all print.
Yes, it is.
I just want to make that distinction. It's not print because it's on the internet. It's still print. I don't think print, as in paper copies, I don't think it's dead, but I think that it's expensive and harder to manage. And I think young people are turning increasingly to digital print as opposed to paper print.
I taught classes here at Texas for a few years. I used to hold up the newspaper and ask if anybody read a newspaper, and there were sometimes people in the class who didn't even really know what one was. That's how bad it was. Anybody want to say?
Yeah, I just wondered, you guys all take journalism, right?
Only some of them.
Oh, only some of them. Well, just in
The
general.
the fortunate few.
The fortunate few. How many of you, show of hands, read a newspaper every day? 1, 2, 4. Oh.
Higher than I thought, actually. I don't know.
Do any of you look on a regular basis at a web news site? You know, CNN, you know, ESPN, whatever? Yeah. See, that is the future. My quick theory, and then it's all yours, is that we're going to end up, the U.S., with 2 or 3 big newspapers, maybe a few more, New York Times, Washington Post, L.A., well, maybe not L.A., but just a handful of big papers. There'll be real small community papers, and then in between will be like Doug and mine.
A friend of mine on faculty, John Timmons, he was born in a community in, I think, upstate New York called Upper Lake. And every now and then he brings me a copy of the weekly when he goes home. And yeah, that I think will continue to fill a need, because it's not really substantial, big enough to actually warrant, you know, a massive online commitment. And people know that it exists, and they know that they can read there. And he brings them in, and I do see some unintentionally hilarious headlines, and that's always fun. No, you guys never did anything like that. Doug, so what's the future for
You know, I'm not going to say I know the future. I don't know
for
the future.
newspapers?
But economically, what's struggling is the printing industry. Printing industry is really struggling. But the news industry, the information business, is exploding on the internet. Everybody can start a business. Anyone can start a business on the internet now. You don't need a printing press to reach hundreds of thousands of people. You can reach millions of people with good search engine optimization. I mean, it's really that simple. You know, it's the ability to afford to print. Advertising costs. I don't know what it costs to advertise a full-page ad in the Current, but I think it's for one day. I think it's close to $10,000. $10,000. And what newspapers don't want to tell you is that, you know, maybe half of the time someone actually reads the paper. It arrives, and it only gets picked up about half the time. So try and tell a client, you know, that's spending 10 grand to reach 200,000 people that it's going to reach 100,000, and then you've got that soft area of multiple readers too. So I mean, it's really hard to quantify. There's no data for it. So they're all moving over to the web to advertise. And I think it happened faster than they thought it would. In 2010, ad revenue online outpaced print for newspaper advertising for the first time. But it wasn't. It was by $3 billion. It was 25 billion to 22 billion or something like that. So it wasn't even like a.
I want to return to the issue of perhaps hybridization between newspapers and online. Look at a couple of experiments that seem to be happening in Connecticut. But Rafael Fierro, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have two related questions about advertising for the entire panel. The first is, I assume, I'm not sure, that advertising will be your main and perhaps only source of revenue. Right?
In a for-profit situation, sure. Yeah.
For-profit situation. Second is, do advertisers contact you once you hit a certain number of readers, or a certain number of readers go to your site, or do you contact them on the web?
Yeah, it depends on what kind. So in retail, you've got to still hustle. If you want to get the Target ad or the car dealer down the street, you got to walk through the door. You got to have a salesman. News Junkie is interesting, and I know the Mirror is starting to take the same kind of manners now too. And I mean, it's a valuable source of revenue, you may as well. But it's that public policy advertising that we're talking about, and there are whole groups of people who are who are trying to change public policy. So once they figure out that your publication is being read by the people they want, they come to you. And you know, I've been fortunate, my wife and I have been fortunate that we figured out how to start generating traffic, because that's not always the case. A lot of people start websites and they never quite figure it out. But once they started noticing that lawmakers were reading, we have a photo on our advertise page of a laptop in the State House chamber, and somebody's reading the CT News Junkie on there. So it was a valuable photo for us, you know. So they're in there making the sausage, you know, and somebody's reading CT News Junkie, so there's a valuable thing there.
And just one clarification too. Not-for-profit doesn't mean that you don't solicit advertisements. You do have the same dynamic in place, I suspect so.
Our organization does not sell advertising.
Right, you don't.
The reason that we don't is because we are very small, and it would take a lot of hours from 2 dedicated volunteers who do almost everything. That's yours truly and this truly. Handle all the paperwork and the tax issues and the legal issues that would come with selling advertising, and then we'd have to go out and try to sell it. We actually are an organization that's trying very hard to raise money, and we get a lot of donations from kind and generous people who value what we do, and we also have gotten some very nice grants, and we are searching for more grants and more backing. We are kind of in the infancy of really trying to fundraise, because we desperately need full-time staff. So that's what we are doing. Everything is volunteer right now, and there's no time to deal with advertising, because we don't do anything that is not legal.
I don't think we do anything illegal.
Oh, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that at all.
Oh, no. The Connecticut Mirror is a nonprofit. We do get advertising. It's called sponsorships. And we are supported by about a dozen foundations. One of our big sponsors, and it's no secret, is the Knight Foundation, which is a monster journalism organization on the West Coast. One of every journalism entity that is concerned about journalism. So we get a lot of support from them. We get support from teachers' unions and from other do-gooder foundations. But no, we're constantly looking for money so we can expand and cover more of Connecticut. But nobody's getting rich off the Mirror, that's for sure.
Just to sort of return to the interplay between print publication and online. I think that there's a couple of interesting things happening in Connecticut right now. Doug, I think you mentioned that yesterday you guys think to deal with the Journal Register Company. So they're going to be running your stuff. And Journal Register Company is a player in Connecticut journalism. For the longest time, I would have to say that it was a miserable player in Connecticut journalism. I worked when I was at the Bristol Press, and the press changed hands, changed owners, and it was acquired by this chain, the Journal Register Company, based in Trenton. And basically, I lasted with them for 18 months, and I couldn't do them anymore, and so I quit. And then, you know, they're wrecking their papers, they're ruining their papers, they're destroying their papers, and that's exactly what they were doing. And in the end, you know, the Bristol Press and the Newport Herald papers in Central Connecticut, they almost closed. They were bought at the last minute by an investor, Michael Schroeder. And then the Journal Register Company entered bankruptcy because they had not only driven their papers into the ground, they'd driven themselves into the ground. But they've emerged from bankruptcy, and they've dumped some of their papers, the Bristol Press and Newport Herald, and they're doing some interesting things, though, I think, with multimedia. The parent company, Journal Register Company, has an operating what we call, I believe, digital media. And the slogan is digital first. They've opened up their newsrooms to the public. The Torrington Register Citizen readers can actually sit in on daily news discussions. And I wonder if you think that sort of hybrid in a place like, I don't know, like in Torrington, I can see it working, but someplace like New Haven, say, which is also a Journal Register community, is that a potential place for print to coexist with digital?
You know, what I worry about is that I worry about how many people give a hoot about news. And I have two kids about the ages of you guys, and they get a lot of their news from Jon Stewart, which I approve of. You know, except for sports and comics and the really soft stuff, they were raised in a home with two journalists, and it's not really their thing. And you know, they register to vote at the last minute. They go, okay, you know, who's the Democrat or whatever. But I think that there is a real problem, and I don't know if you guys are as pessimistic as I am, but I'm way pessimistic. I think that people, you know, you talk about citizen journalism and people sitting in on news meetings. I would bet a lot of money it doesn't happen in Torrington or anywhere. I think you get special interest people who grab something and get all hot under the collar about it, but I think people feel it's not relevant to them, and that's the immense challenge that we have as journalists and that this country has to keep a healthy democracy. I'll get off my soapbox.
Periodically, I will get a student in my journalism 1 class who tells me, you know, my parents didn't want me to take this course because they think it's a waste of effort. And my response is always to them, well, the thing is, yes, there's a sea change underway, but you're always going to need people to write the news, to edit the news, to take pictures of the news. But then the last part of that equation is who's going to read the news. Yeah.
See, that's funny, because I think that that's not true. I think that we have more readers than we've ever had, ever. I mean, by far, because we have all these people reading online for free. The trouble is that we haven't got a way to get paid for that. So I don't really see that people are necessarily less informed. And certainly as people who are trying to teach young journalists, I have great faith in the future of the profession. I think that there's going to be all kinds of opportunities. We're just in this weird shake-up period where it's not really clear how people are going to make a living at it. But you know, people like Doug and Christine and the Connecticut Mirror, and there's all these different ways that are, you know, somebody's got the path to the future, and it's already here. We just don't necessarily know which path it is. And I think that we're always going to have people who are journalists, and even besides that, the skills that you learn are great for anything. I mean, the kids that we train go on to, they go to law school or med school or whatever, and they still come back and say, the things that we learned as journalists help with everything that we do. So I have faith in it all.
Yeah, you were, when you were at the Journal Inquirer, you were the webmaster. You were responsible for the web page. And while you were there, the Journal Inquirer changed its philosophy rather dramatically. I mean, it was open source. And I'll have to tell you, when it was open source, I read it every day. And then they started charging.
Yeah.
And I stopped reading.
Yeah, the paywall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the conversation that, and I went kicking and screaming. You know, I argued with the publisher. It's a stupid thing to do when when you don't buy paper by the roll. But they were right. I mean, they were right. You know, we lost a ton of paid circulation, and that paid circulation was what was maintaining the ad rates, and the bulk of the money was coming through there. But you know, we're at a once in a lifetime, maybe once in 4 or 5 lifetime change here. The print news industry has been around for a long time, but it's been eroding. It's been eroding little by little. It started with the radio and then television and then cable TV. But I think the internet is the one that really directly challenges it, because it's practically the same product, except it's got all sorts of bells and whistles. And I don't know if it's ever gonna. I don't know if anybody's ever really gonna be interested in local news in huge numbers. There's a civic engaged group of people who are homeowners or business owners, but young people they're interested in other things. And I think, to your point, Steve, I think we're a lot more engaged nationally in political discussion than we were. You know, I think the Trayvon Martin story is a good example. Everyone is talking about this. It happened in Florida, but there isn't a whole lot of people in the town I live in talking about the budget in Windsor. You know, I mean, it's not going to generate that much interest unless you have a direct concern over it. So, you know, once you're a homeowner, you start thinking about, geez, where am I going to get my local news? You know, and who's going to go to the meeting for me? That's really what it comes down to, because public meetings are painful. You know, and so the reporters are paid to go and sit there and listen to it and read the agenda and say, okay, what's important here? So we're going to put it in the inverted pyramid, we're going to put the most important thing at the top, and then we're going to bullet all the lesser items and tell the public what happened at this meeting, because somebody cares somewhere in town. You know, but they need to know it. There's a need to know.
I will. If you're a reporter and you're covering a Board of Education meeting that enters its 5th hour, yeah, you come up with an entirely different way to spell board, you know, of education. So, a question from the audience. I mean, Robin.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks, Bob, for putting this together. I'd like to get back to the ethical piece that Bob was mentioning. And most of you said that with the internet and the online medium, it's important that you get things out fast. Things have to go fast. Now, in the old days, it seemed like a tip came in, Jimmy Olsen went out and checked it out. You had time to make sure that the story was accurate. How do you balance the need to get things out quickly with the need to make sure that what you're putting on your pages is accurate?
I just remembered about this fight I used to have with another editor. She was wicked good at putting stuff online, and I'd be editing a story, and I'd write a headline, and she'd say, okay, that's good. And I'd go, no, it's not. And we'd have this, you know, that's not exactly right, or, you know, I got to check with the reporter about this, and it's one of those things you just got to work out. You just, I think I'm an editor first rather than, well, you know, if I find out that Obama won the election, I don't really care if I misspell his name. You know, I want to get that out. But for a lot of stuff, you know, I'm the one saying, hold it. And I don't know how you guys, you seem, you get it both ways. I mean, most of us, we've done it for a while, and we know, you know, if something doesn't sound right, we'll cut it out till we can check it out. I don't know if that answers it. I just, This other point occurred to me that I just related to what you said. You were asking about before about the future of journalism, and I just read this thing this week, and it's about that the New York Times opinion pages, which are incredibly powerful, have just started adding video, that you can now get on the op-ed pages with, where they're going to be presenting video. And this to me, that maybe the traditional news, I'm quite pessimistic about it, but I think storytelling in whatever form is going to continue to be vital. And whether it's in video or in audio or through a photo gallery or through wonderful writing, I think that has a future in whatever form.
Helen Uvenius, this has occurred to me as you were talking. Helen Uvenius was a former columnist for the Current, and it was her task, not a pleasant task, to cover the first, I think, of the Pettit murder cases. And she was in the courtroom feeding basically live. And she was having to make her mind up, do I include this particularly graphic detail or don't I? And she wrote very movingly about how difficult that was. Yeah, I think it was sort of an eye-opener for her. And I think sort of to a certain extent shaped the path that she chose to take going forward from that.
She was doing it on Twitter.
Yeah.
140 characters. You got to be all about brevity. Can I just want to address the thing about vetting. The beauty of the internet is you can take something down. Once it's printed on a piece of, on a newspaper and goes out, you've got to do a correction. There's more vetting in the print industry, and that is part of the reason why you need editors, more editors, multiple people to read the story, because their knowledge of the topic, having been an editor, having been a reporter before that, covering the same issue that the reporter, your new reporter is writing about, you know what the election was, the last 4 or 5 elections. Chances are you know the players. But this is how, this is where the good websites are rising to the top. It's that the reporters are positioned well and they know what's going on in their beat. So the chances of my wife putting up a story that is completely inaccurate is pretty low. She's not going to post it if she's not sure. But there definitely is, there are plenty of examples of people rushing to publish. And news literacy, you all need to be very literate with your news knowledge. Americans, everybody needs to be, news literacy is a new project. People need to be aware of the value of the source of information and whether they have a propensity to bend the facts to a political agenda. The news literacy project is a new thing that started in New York. And just a real quick story here. When Katrina happened, a reporter, this is what was relayed to me, and this is how this came about. But a reporter is out on the ground after the storm, walks up to a National Guardsman who was near a locker, a freezer, said, "What's in there?" And the guy says, "Dead bodies." And he's basically, I don't have the exact language here, but basically he bought it. He didn't open the freezer. So that went from a print news story right to the television networks. And then we all spent the next few days thinking, oh my God, they're murdering each other. In New Orleans, everyone bought it once it got on TV. And TV is such a powerful medium. And as it turns out, there were no bodies in there. And the guy the reporter eventually traced back all of his sources. And the National Guardsman that he spoke to said that's what the previous guy on duty had told him. So the test that a lot of students are being taught in news literacy courses is to, did they open the freezer? Let's look at the story and figure out, geez, did they open the freezer on that? I don't think they opened the freezer. I think we're starting to see questions about the Trayvon Martin story now. And I don't know, I haven't looked at it as closely as a lot of you have maybe, but now we're starting to see new stories coming out saying, oh, this is not exactly what the witnesses said. So maybe the first few stories, maybe they were on target, maybe they weren't. But rushing to judgment, bad.
Terry Cassidy.
I'm really somewhat confused about how to ask the question I want to ask. But when we
try here. For several years, I was involved professionally with school boards and school superintendents, and saw an awful lot of what the press reported had happened at meetings. And over time became more and more disillusioned with what I was reading reporters saying was happening at meetings. And I wondered about accountability then. And I guess I wonder about accountability for you. You're obviously all wonderful people. I'm very impressed with you, but that and 50 cents won't even buy me a cup of coffee anymore. Who holds you accountable? How do you articulate clearly a philosophy of the kinds of things that you want to be engaged with or want to report? And who is looking at you to see whether you're playing fair?
Stephen Mackey, you are actually you're in the trenches, you report.
Well, who holds us accountable? Well, basically you do. I mean, it's, you know, if you don't trust the source, you stop reading it. But I would just, to say that you go to a meeting and the stories didn't necessarily match up, stories aren't necessarily about the meetings. I mean, they're about topics that sometimes happen at the meetings. I mean, I get that a lot, that people will say, you know, something happens at a city council meeting or a zoning meeting or whatever, and the story doesn't match up with what happened at the meeting. But the story isn't about the meeting. The story is about the issue that was raised there. And so sometimes it's, you know, the meaning is tangential to what the story is.
Well, really, I am talking about stories just being represented. I'm not talking about things being tangential or...
These are just stories that are wrong.
The stories are wrong.
Well, there are lousy reporters out there. I mean, that's, what can I say? That's true. We've certainly seen them over the years. And I would hope that, you know, those people would get weeded out of the profession, because, you know, editors and, you know, they're going to hear from it. If somebody's getting things wrong with any kind of regularity, their boss is going to know they're not going to have a job doing this, or they're just going to leave. Most of them just leave. They find something else to do. I mean, it's probably a bigger problem at a town meeting or a board of education thing, because usually it's a younger reporter, or somebody who hasn't been around as long, and you know, they're just not cut out for it.
And increasingly, new reporters are not trained. They come to the job, but they don't know what they're doing, and there is no one in the newsroom to help them learn.
And on top of that, you have, oh gosh, editors who rotate from place to place to place, and they don't have the depth of knowledge of the community that would allow them to say, well, that's not really the case. And I can give you a couple of examples. I can remember a reporter covering the Board of Education in Bristol, and reported something that the superintendent of schools had said, and her name was Ann Clark. There's only one way to spell Ann Clark. No, there are many ways to spell Ann Clark. And hers is A-N-N-E, not A-N-N, and C-L-A-R-K, not C-L-A-R-K-E. He got the name wrong twice because he not spelled her name. And these things do happen. I can remember the young woman who no longer is in journalism, I think, who working for one of our sister papers, the Register Citizen in Torrington, when I was in the press, who doing a profile of Torrington and Winstead, you know, two very different towns separated by a river. The problem is, she said, more than the Connecticut River divides Winstead and Torrington. And she's only off by about 50 miles, you know, so yeah, a lot of, they don't get paid very much, and there's a sort of a churn that happens. So
and there are not too many jobs where the whole town sees what you do every day.
Other questions? Alan?
I was actually just having this debate with some of the older members of my family. I love journalism and I read online journalism. I don't pick up the paper very rarely, except for the Tunxis Sun.
Yay.
But we were discussing what journalism actually is, because when I was talking about blogs I go to, and everybody is saying, you know, anybody with a cell phone can be a journalist. They can take video, they can post it online. They can say, this is what happened, and people will read it. How do you distinguish? Is it an issue with the actual journalism profession? profession, or is it the readers that have to be able to keep up with, okay, before I used to get my print news from Hartford Current, I know that's edited, now I have to take everything with a grain of salt when it's online.
I think you have touched on a very important issue. I think it's both the responsibility of the news producers and the news consumers. One of the things that scares me a lot is, are young people learning how to discern what's a reasonable source of information, what's a legitimate news site, and what's just any Tom, Dick, or Harry's blog. That does worry me. So I think it's really important for young people to learn how to evaluate where their news is coming from, and it's also important in the profession. It's hurtful when someone does something like Bob was describing, makes mistakes. It makes it harder for all of us. But like Steve said, if people start to get to know who you are and your site, then they start to recognize, that you're reliable.
The people who have 2:30 classes are starting to filter away. I guess we can wrap up now. And I want to go back to anybody have other questions? I wanted to go back to something like a theme that was articulated a while ago. We really are in the middle of something now, and we don't know quite what it is. And given to sort of grandiose historical analogies, I sort of liken it to the explorer Cortez, who stumbled across the Pacific Ocean. And he thought, oh my God, there's another one. And it's even more vast probably than the one we came from. And he looks out of the Pacific and all he feels is a sense of awe. And he doesn't know what's next. And I think that's sort of where we all are. And that is the Pacific Ocean. And we just don't know how to navigate it. But we're working at it, and it's forums like this, I hope, it helps students and faculty at Tunxis to come to grips with them. I'd like to thank all of you. And by all means,